Dark fantasy is the cornerstone of any Souls-like when it comes to the genre. The overall safe approach to the setting can give the game a sense of familiarity, or alternatively, uninspired. So many games release which don't break the mould. Does the first Berserker Khazan stand out as a fresh take on the genre, or does it fall into the over-encompassing stale box of other entries? The visual portrayal of the game is striking when compared to the similar Souls-likes in the same vein. Taking on a cel-shaded approach with the characters and environment gives a striking canvas for the game to stand out. The added use of colour contrasting from the character to the locations is solid. Khazan stands strong through his crimson appearance, which contrasts beautifully with the perfect white sheen of the winter environment. Ice and snow allow for a more natural interpretation to level design, consisting of caves, ledges and forests. The small areas shown within the demo so far are not incredibly distinct from one another, however there is more than enough to differentiate between the two. The first area, Mount Hymak, the visual of each name of the area smashing its way onto the screen harkens back to the older days of Skyrim. It's effective and striking in its presentation, which screams, "Look at me." The darkness depicted through the woods of Hymak manages to install that sense of dread with every step the character takes. Colliding in the snow creates a trail of particles and where the character has walked, illustrating the environment's harsh architecture further. The lack of light is a benefit to the start of the game, pigeoning the character down an orchestrated path through a curated tutorial area. The first location utilises many aspects the character can interact with throughout their journey, such as elevated areas, plunging locations and optional paths. In terms of the tutorial section, it's incredibly effective. Breaking up the areas with different biomes such as caves and cliffs gives variety to essentially a mountain. The second area, Storm Pass, utilises a lighter exterior, allowing the player to visualise more of the map in its entirety. Shortcuts show an organic progression using trees or carts. Ladders are only used when human enemies are in the vicinity. It's well thought out to keep the illusion of the world as a whole. Ever since Sekiro, parrying has become a staple in Souls-likes to add a much needed variety to the player's moveset. Games such as Liza P manage to balance the use of stamina to affect both the dodging mechanic and the parrying. Khazan takes this concept a step further with the introduction of Brink. The word I would use to describe Khazan's combat is aggressive. Every mechanic is positioned in order for the player to gain more damage to an enemy. Passive traits are simply steps to executing offensive strategy. Brink is Khazan's statement of unique for the genre. The mechanic, which could be misconstrued as simply referring to a parry or dodge, created a whole new state of play with added bonuses. Every action you perform, apart from walking, will result in your character consuming stamina. This could be detrimental to the flow of fighting enemies when Brink is utilised. However, it creates a perfect risk and reward system when approaching an encounter. Timing between enemies is varied and allows the player to change their approach depending on the enemy in question. For example, the first enemy you encounter, the Greatsword Soldier, is slow, methodical and deliberate in its movements. Through the Brink mechanic, the player has the option to guard the sword when the weapon reaches the point of collision with the player, or dodge. Both options are viable and change the trajectory of the fight. Guarding will drastically alter the stamina of the enemy, but at the cost of yours, whereas if you perfectly time the dodge to create a Brink dodge, your next hit will be double the damage. The visual indication of each move is presented clearly and fast. The guard is represented by a purple aura, whereas the dodge is a grey cloak. The use of the change of colour allows the player to have an optical feedback to the move in question. Both moves contain audio feedback, making the player notice the move has been successful. Thanks to my obsession with parrying, I guarded many attacks in this demo, but the use of the Brink dodge came in clutch multiple times during bosses. This one-syllable word is the bedrock of the game's combat, and it's fantastic. Guards feel impactful, Brink dodges create gaps for breath in fights and repositioning. The stamina isn't much, making the player cautious of the amount they have left in order to combat the enemy. Khazan will become exhausted, leaving the player open to any attack from an adversary. The time between getting knocked down and getting back up again is instantaneous. The game wants you to be back in the fight. There's no waste of time with animations, each is crafted with the intent of being satisfying to pull off. Enemy readability is difficult to perfect when crafting enemies and bosses in this genre. Developers fall into the challenge of wanting to create the most beautiful spectacle of an attack but forgetting to incorporate readability into said attack. The game understands that combos have to have a sense of cohesion between one swing and the next. The final boss of the demo illustrates the point perfectly. Through weight shift and visual cues, it's clear when the boss will perform a combo chain. Fast timings of each attack is consistent with animation time, allowing the player to react to the onslaught and counter effectively from the first instance of witnessing the attack. I cannot state how hopeful I am that this game will be something to behold. The developers understand the core nature of what this genre thrives on. These games are reactive games, not predictive games. A back and forth of understanding and reacting to movesets as they come rather than reacting through repetition is the difference between a good game in this genre and a bad game. 3 weapons are presented to the player during the demo, which all have their own unique movesets incorporating different timings for parrying and speed of attacks. Each weapon supplies the player with an extensive skill tree for all 3 weapons. I gravitated towards the dual wielding as I prefer the accelerated speed of the weapon compared to the greatsword and spear. These weapons remind me of the 3 playstyles in Blasphemous 2. The use of multiple upgrades within separate skill perks are great as it allows more mastery of certain skills. The ability to upgrade your skill tree on your person as well as reset any points you want at any time create a fast-paced approach to the game design in which I'm a massive fan of. There seems to be a mechanic where Khazan can only have a certain amount of abilities at one given time. This will drastically affect the use of resets within the game and will add a constant sense of changing your build to suit the current fight, rather than your build overall. Like most recent games such as Lies of P, Lacrima or Souls are collected before entering boss arenas, which allow players to collect their well-earned souls and upgrade their character. The upgrade screen is built upon the foundation of prioritizing increasing the speed of the stamina and limit the amount consumed from attacks. Each upgrade has multiple effects, meaning you're always upgrading multiple aspects to Khazan, making every upgrade worthwhile. Skills can be obtained within boss arenas which transfer to your character after losing that attempt. I love this. It could make the game easy as you progress, but alternatively the amount of customization within your chosen moveset will grow exponentially with this approach. Beating first phases of fights and dying in the second will reward with more Lacrima, which almost incentivizes dying on purpose to capitalize on the mechanic. Loot is gained from picking up items on the map, but also from killing enemies. I killed this Yeti 3 times, which I felt was gonna be a mini-boss which would disappear after killing him. But every time he was killed, he dropped a new type of loot. This could be an interesting incentive to kill everything up to a boss once again, as you're rewarded with multiple forms of loot. Loot seems to have multiple tiers which will incorporate buffs, and from the look of the symbols on each item, there are a number of scales, maybe hinting at the ability to upgrade different pieces of armor for more buffs. We shall see. The 2 bosses presented in the demo show a clear identity of the design choices of the game. The Yeti represents a larger-than-life beast which illustrates strong, slow, deliberate movesets. Animations are perfectly curated to show what the enemy will move like. He hits hard and moves from neutral to attacking stance smoothly, showing when you can hit the enemy safely. Phase 2 incorporates a Frost Beam attack which utilises the use of Brink Dodge, incorporating the moveset for both passive and aggressive play. A really good beginner boss which is built up to organically through the minor Yetis throughout the area. The Blade Phantom is fast and loose with moves, forcing the player to react accordingly and as aggressively as possible. Multiple combos will consist of 7 to 8 attacks with a clear rest period to punish between the onslaught of moves. Burst attacks are composed of breaking the enemy's posture, leaving them open to riposte for high damage with a small window. Every single attack from the Blade Phantom was readable and reactable upon the first attempt. The Blade Phantom may well be too aggressive for an early boss, that might be why they didn't include a counter burst attack in the fight. However, it presents a strong foundation to build upon which will hopefully only progress and deepen as the game continues. The demo for the first Berserker Khazan sets up an interesting foundation for a game with massive potential for experimentation and variety within the movesets. The use of the Brink mechanic being utilised for both passive and aggressive play sets up a precedence for the rest of the game, as well as acutely timed parry timings, animation fidelity and readability of enemies and bosses. A clear sense of variety from mobs within multiple areas utilising certain aspects such as clear animation timing, ranged combat, melee combat and interesting visual design. The bosses demonstrate a clear balance of spectacle and deep mechanics which can broaden as the game progresses. The visual design of moves and assets add a sense of cohesion to the bosses which create a striking canvas elevated by the cel-shaded approach to the art style. Overall, the first Berserker Khazan has the potential to be something truly special, and I for one cannot wait to dive in on the 27th of March. The Phantom Blade is calling. Let's take up the sword.